Okay, so my awesome wife made a huge pot of chili for supper, and clearly we couldn't eat it all. But after a good hearty dinner and relaxing a little bit, decided to save some of it for later. So we're gonna can it real quick. So here's all the stuff we're going to use, plus the jars that are in the dishwasher. We'll get those out in a second. Plus a big pressure canner, and of course the lid, and the rattler, and a divider for the different jars that we go in there. So I already put some water in here and started it boiling a while ago because it takes a good while for it to heat up. So while I was waiting for the jars to sanitize, I started the stove with water in the pressure canner, about probably 40% of the way full, maybe half. And what'll happen is when we put the warm chili into the hot water, it will heat up the chili quicker, so it'll get the whole pot to a pressure status quicker. So putting it into boiling water is a little faster on the process than starting it from scratch when you put the cans in. So anyway, so the two different types of canning, by the way, the reason that we're pressure canning chili is because you can't water bath can anything that doesn't have a lot of sugar and a lot of acid, like tomatoes. You can obviously do jelly, and anything that has a lot of sugar in it, you can water bath can, which means you could use the same exact pot, just don't put the lid on it, don't can it under pressure, and you can do the same exact thing and it'll preserve it just fine. But when you do things like meat and beans and things like that, you have to do something a little bit more aggressive, like pressure canning. All right, so here's the cans. We just got them out of the dishwasher, so they're really hot, and you can tell my wife's wearing gloves. Okay, so what we're gonna do here is we're gonna take the chili, and it can be warm, obviously, or cold. It doesn't really make any difference. The warmer it is, the faster it will process. So you'll also notice, if you pan in here, you'll see these different jars. We've got a bunch of different size jars here. We've got some wide mouth jars and some regular mouth jars. The good news is there's really only two sizes, wide mouth and regular mouth. They have a lot of different size jars, but these all use exactly the same lid. You can get a pint jar in wide mouth too. I like the wide mouths for things like pickles and potatoes and peaches and things that are kind of large and bulky that go through a little better. When it comes to soups and stews, it doesn't really make any difference as far as I can tell. It's just as easy to use a narrow mouth jar. So we keep reusing these over and over again. These probably had chili in them 5 or 6 other times. The other thing that's important to do, especially with pressure canning, is make sure you fill it to the right headspace. So the headspace is that space between the top of the lid and where the top of the product comes. So if the product comes up to here and your lid is here, that's roughly a 1/2 inch headspace. This would be closer to 1 inch. Anything between 1 inch and a 1/2 inch is normal, but for chili I like to do a 1/2 inch. Usually with jellies and things that you're going to water bath can, you can get away with a little bit longer, more open headspace, like 1 inch. But when it comes to doing chili and things like that, you really should only do a 1/2 inch headspace. All right, so we got our ladle. Oop, little clanking going on. And you try to keep this process as less messy as you can. And I like this new funnel rather than the one that normally comes in this set, because it does a good job of holding over the threads and trying to keep it a little bit cleaner. So when you get ready to put the lids on, you're going to see we have to go through a little bit of a wiping process, and the cleaner we can make that, the better it will be. All right, so we're almost done with this first one. So I'll top that off. Okay. Now when you take the lid off, you'll see this space between here and the top of the jar, between the product and the top of the jar, just a little bit less than a half. That one's probably just slightly over full, but not too bad. A little bit may bleed over into the pressure canner, into the water, and that's really not a big deal. I'm gonna set that one aside. We're gonna come back and fill all these, and then we're gonna clean and put lids on. This is what, oh, I got a little too much in this one. I'm gonna dump some out. There we go, feel a little better about that. We'll have to go back and wipe those threads off. You notice that one had just a little too much in there. And again, it's not a huge deal, except that if it's too full, what will happen is the product will try to push past the seal, and I'll show you the seal on the rings in a minute. And when it pushes past the seal, it often leaves something in the way so that the seal won't make a good contact to the jar. So that will cause the jar not to seal. So that's why the headspace is important. You don't want to overfill it, but if you underfill it, it won't have enough material in there to press all the air and everything out to keep it a good canning situation. What you're really trying to do is evacuate all the oxygen. And if you have too much headspace, the process will leave oxygen in there and they won't last as long. The reason we do two different size jars, single serving versus double serving. So if both of us are eating chili for lunch or dinner, we open a quart jar. If it's just one person, we just open a pint jar. Gives you options. You can also put one of these in your backpack, take it to work, and put it in the microwave and have chili for lunch.
So how long do you have to bathe them or pressure cook them?
10 minutes at 10 pounds. So when it reaches 10 psi, you start the timer, and at 10 minutes you stop.
What do you do if you get all done and they didn't seal right? Can you just redo the process over again, or do you gotta put new caps on? And
You'll have to put new caps on and clean the top of the jar, but you can process it again in another pressure canner right away as soon as you're done. You don't have to wait at all. I would recommend waiting till probably the next day, but if it doesn't seal, you can reprocess it just like normal.
how long will it last?
If canned properly, stored in a cool, dry place, away from a lot of light, it really should last 4 or 5, maybe as many as 6 years.
Oh, that long?
Yeah. Really just depends how well you do at keeping the light out of it and the temperature down. But the good news is you can usually tell pretty easy when you open it. If it's not good, you'll know. So there's not like you have to, not a lot of mystery there. Okay, so just like we have two different size jars, we have two different size lids, wide mouth lids, regular size lids. We have two different size rings, wide mouth rings, regular rings. The mistake I made at the very beginning is when I would I would take these off and throw them away thinking I always had new jars. Well, when I started reusing jars and I realized I was running low on lids, or rings rather, I started saving the rings because you're going to want to hang on to at least a few dozen of them. So every time you can, you don't necessarily have to use all new rings every single time. You just have to have enough for every batch that you do, because once they're sealed, you take the rings off, put them back in your tote, and you're good. You don't need to leave the rings on after they're sealed. But you do need enough to be able to process, so it's a good idea to have a couple dozen over the wide mouth and a couple dozen of the regular, just to make sure that you have enough. All right, so what we're going to do here, it doesn't really matter what order we do these, obviously, but I'm going to take the top of each jar and wipe it off with a paper towel. And the objective here is to make sure it's as clean as it can possibly be. This one I actually feel, because if it's not clean, when you get ready to try to seal it, it won't seal correctly. This one feels like it has a little residue actually from a prior canning. Alright, we got that clean. Alright, so that's a regular mouth, so we're going to use a regular lid. So each lid has this rubber ring around the inside. All right, and you'll also notice it's a very flimsy tin lid, because that's going to be important. You'll notice this little raised portion, little button here. When we get done processing these, that's how we're going to know if we did it right, by the way this tin lid reacts. So once you got that clean, set the lid on there nice and easy. Put this on, but don't super tighten it down, just a little bit. You don't want to reef on it, because if you do, you'll make it hard for the thing to seal. It won't pop, the air won't escape very well. So you want to get it just right, and then the temperature difference inside will actually suck that lid down onto the top of the jar. So again, you got to go through this with every single jar. Make sure they're clean. You don't have to use paper towel. You can use a rag if you're happy about that. Lid and ring. Now my plan here, I filled that pressure cooker about halfway and it's starting to boil. My plan is to put the quart jars on the bottom and I'll put the pint jars on the top. This is a double size. I have another one of these that's a little bit shorter, but you can't put 2 quart jars on top of each other. This is a large batch pot, so you can put quarts on the bottom and another stack of quarts on the top, or add the spacer on top of the quart jars and put all your pints on top, and that makes the processing a lot faster. When you're doing high volumes, it's a good idea to have that taller pressure canner. This part's kind of tedious, but it's actually one of the most important steps of the process. If you have dirt or contaminant on the ring, I shouldn't say dirt, anything that contaminates the seal, and it doesn't seal, and you wasted a lot of time, effort, and resources. So it really makes sense to pay extra attention at this step that you're not missing anything. Okay, so all of our jars are capped and ready to go in the water. You want to come around this side? So what we're going to do is use our handy dandy jar grabbers. Lower these down in the water very carefully. You don't want to drop them. And in this case, the water is going to go over the quart jars, and that's okay. They're not going to go over the pint jars, however, in every case. So then that's also okay, because we're pressure canning. You're not actually having to bathe everything 100% in water. Put in our spacer. And because I don't have a full bottom, we're going to play a little teeter-totter action with that plate. That has an extension. Oh, I wouldn't help you see it though, would it? Bada bing, bada boom. Okay, so all our jars are in the canner. Next step, so we take our lid. And this lid I've actually has a pressure gauge on it and a rattler. That's what this is called. This one's got a little rust on it, but it comes in 3 different pressures, 5, 10, and a 15. And what you do is you'll put it right on top of this spout. When we get going and the steam starts coming out, steam will come out of there. You'll put the pressure number on that you want. So if you want 10 pounds of pressure, you'll put the 10 number down on the rattler over that steam hole. And then when that thing starts rattling, and why they call it the rattler, it'll start letting steam come off. And when it does, you'll know that you're at 10 pounds of pressure. Now, the good news is about this particular pressure canner, I actually have a gauge as well. So the rattler works, but the other one is a little bit more precise. Now, the big thing about pressure cookers is you have to make sure that they're cinched down and cinched down evenly. If one of these ears is over cinched, and you stand, you risk breaking your lid when you tighten it down. So be careful to make sure that you get this as pretty close to even as you can. Little twist at a time, all the way around in a circle. All right. Now I'm going to pull that rattler off. And what I like to do is wait for the steam to start coming out of there. As soon as the steam starts coming out, then I'll put the 10-pound rattler on there, the rattler for the 10 psi, and then wait for that to start dancing. As soon as that starts dancing, we're going to set a reminder or a timer on our clock. It's for 10 minutes. And I'll come back and we'll get to the end of that when this thing starts bouncing around. I'll video some more. All right, so we came back here after a little bit, and what you're looking for is that little bit of steam coming out of that hole. You see that little bit of steam vapor right there? It's just enough to let you know it's boiling. So we're going to take this rattler, find the number 10, slide that right on top, And what'll happen is that'll start building up pressure, and it'll start to move back and forth. And when it starts doing that, I'll show you. And then we're also gonna watch the gauge. You see there's no pressure on the gauge at this point. It'll get up to about 10 pounds when we're done, obviously, which is the point of the rattler, but this just lets you see the progress. So I'll come back in a little bit and show you the rattler. So I came back about maybe 10 minutes later, 5 minutes later, and you can see the pressure is about 4 pounds, maybe 3.5 pounds, almost 4 pounds. Now, obviously the rattler's not moving yet because, yes, it's not at 10 pounds yet. So we'll just keep watching. Okay, came back about 10 minutes later, and you can tell the gauge is right at 10 pounds. And you'll see the rattler start to bounce around a little bit. And of course, you can hear it rattling, which is why it's called a rattler. And really, what you're trying to do is, if you don't have the pressure gauge, is once that rattler starts moving consistently without stopping, then you see how there's a slight pause every now and again, builds up a little bit of pressure and then vents off at 10 pounds. So it's right at about 10 pounds according to the gauge, which is just over 10 pounds actually, which is obviously a lot more sensitive than this rattling method. But back in the day when you were making a pressure cooker, it was a lot easier to make this metal rattler than it was to make a gauge for everyone else. So they generally just kind of rattle. Anyway, you'll see now that it's kind of rattling consistently. So right now is when I'm going to set my clock timer for 10 minutes. And we're going to come back and show you how to shut this thing down and take your... Okay, so clock just went off. It's been at 10 pounds. The rattler's been bouncing for the last 10 minutes. We're going to shut off all the heat. And then take either an oven mitt or our jar grabber. And I'll pull this rattler off. And it's super hot, so be careful. Be very careful. It's really hot. So that's steam coming out of there, obviously. And what we're going to do is let that depressurize the container before we touch any of the screws at all the bolts or the wing nuts that are holding the lid on. So what I do is I just let it go until there's absolutely no pressure at all coming out of that. And you can obviously tell, you can hear the steam probably more than seeing it right now. But you can also see that inside the container, there's still pressure. This gauge is still live and it's showing about 8 pounds. It's descending at first, but that's still quite a lot of pressure, believe it or not. So we're gonna let that vent off for a little bit. And in the meantime, we're gonna get set up to take the jars out. So what I do is I get a mat. I like these drying mats that my wife has for doing dishes. Well, we have for doing dishes. You can use a dish towel, anything that you like. But the idea is you want to set the jars down on something a little bit soft. You don't want to put them on a hard granite surface when they're hot. I'm always afraid they're going to break when they're hot, they're especially fragile. So I like to put them on something soft. Also, if there's any water or any moisture that is left on the jars, this will soak it up. So it's a good place to put jars when they come right out of the canner. All right, so just in that time we've been talking, pressure came down to about 7 pounds. But it's still actively blowing out, so that's obviously still got some time to go. All right, so we're going to give that a second, and then we'll come right back to it. All right, so here we are back after about another, about 4 or 5 minutes or so of letting this thing gas off, and you can see now that it's good. I put my hand over it, you don't really feel anything, so that's how you know it's good to start loosening the screws on the top of the pressure. And I just like back them off about a half a turn each all the way around. And if there is any residual pressure, they'll slide up and take the slack out on the lid rather than anything worse. So once you get half turns all the way around, then you can just pop them all open. Okay, give it a little turn. And there's all of our wonderful jars of chili. So, very simply, they're boiling hot. You can still see the chili boiling and you can hear it boiling. I'm just going to take these out one at a time, really gently, try not to bang them together. Leave about a 1/2 inch air space all the way around them. And hopefully, we'll hear them start doing the familiar tinging sound here shortly, which lets you know that they're processed correctly. Remember I talked earlier about that lid, and what'll happen is as they cool, the vacuum forms and sucks that lid down and holds it to the jar, and that's why that's what actually does the vacuum sealing, is this heat. And once that suction is formed, it will make a tinging sound, and you'll hear it, a little popping sound in a minute as it cools down. This actually looks really good. I don't see any discoloration in the water, and sometimes that'll happen if the jars are over full and spill into the water. But in this case, I think we're in good shape. I don't see anything in there but water, so that's good. Watch these for just a second. I don't know if you can get the right angle here. There's still a little bit of water on some of these, but like that one right there, you can see the little button that's popped up. And what will happen is when these things cool, that button will make a tinging sound and you'll know that they're sealed. We'll come back and check them in a minute. So I didn't go back and show you the canning after I was done, but all but one can sealed, or one jar rather, sealed perfectly. So we just put that one jar in the refrigerator and we'll eat that for supper probably today or tomorrow. But generally speaking, it's a pretty reliable process. So again, it's worth it. It's worth the effort, especially if you're trying to make your life simpler and want to preserve food long term. Frankly, most people don't have enough long-term food storage, and given the current shortage situations that we're in right now, it'll be a good thing to do, I think. So anyway, hopefully that was helpful. If it was, please like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll bring more information to you as I can. I'm doing videos all the time on fixing things, general home improvement, general homesteading and preparedness, gun safety, flying, and a bunch of other stuff. So please subscribe to the channel. Love to hear from you, and please let me know how you like the video and the contents. Thanks. Have a great day.